All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Planning Commission workshop for Thursday, June 6th, 2024 at 4 p.m. I call this meeting to order. First item on the agenda is determination of a quorum. I believe all commissioners are present, so we do indeed have a quorum. Moving along, adoption of the agenda is the next item. Do I hear a motion to adopt?
I'll move to adopt.
In a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Aye.
Visitor communication. This is the time provided for individuals wishing to address the Planning Commission regarding issues not already on the agenda. We don't have anyone in the gallery, so we'll go ahead and move along to the workshop. I'll turn it over to staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Seymour. Work has been commencing, as you guys know, on the urban growth boundary amendment. Mostly it's been work with between staff and consultants so far, but getting our project website up to speed and putting together a public engagement plan, and then starting work on the land needs report. And we felt it was time to check in with the Planning Commission and kind of give you an overview of what we've been doing and what we've got planned over the course of the project. And then at the tail end, we'll talk about the I'll talk about the formation of the steering committee that we're organizing. Just had interviews the last couple of days, and we'll talk all about that and Planning Commission representation on that committee. We have on the call with us today our consultants who are working side by side with us and helping guide this process with their experience. And so those folks are folks you know and recognize, but we've got Matt Hasty, the project manager for this project from MIG, as well as Andrew Parrish. They are going to give a little presentation today on kind of the project timeline and the scope, a little bit about more about the public engagement, and then answer any questions that you guys might have. It's not meant to, there's no decisions being made today. It's more of an update on the process. So I will, with that, I will turn it over. Matt, I think you're going to kick it off for us here.
Yes. Yeah. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having us on the screen there. And as Scott said, we'll give you just kind of an overview presentation of the process. Pretty brief. Be happy to answer questions or just take comments if you have them, either along the way or at the end or both. And really, Andrew is going to do the bulk of the presenting. So I'm going to kind of introduce us, and then he's going to cover kind of the process and schedule and the steps we'll be going through. I'll talk a little bit about community engagement objectives, and then Andrew will talk about specific strategies that we're intending to use to engage folks, and just kind of finish up, I think, with next steps. So that's what we're going to do for you. And again, happy to take questions as we go along. And we are going to share a presentation. When I say we, I mean Andrew, and he'll kind of walk us through the first bit of this. I think, are you going to take the prior planning slide, Andrew, or should I cover that one?
I'll go ahead and cover this one.
Perfect. All right.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. Happy to be with you again here remotely this time. So my name is Andrew Parrish with a company called MIG, and we've been doing a lot of work for the City of Sisters over the last several years. So on this slide, we're kind of showing where we've been. This is all part of kind of the same process. So you've been involved in these decisions for a while at this point. Back in 2019, we did a housing needs analysis and a housing strategies report for the city, and that led to the comprehensive plan update in 2021. We did an update to the housing needs analysis at that time because there was an update to the state, the Portland State University projections for population for the city of Sisters. We did an economic opportunities analysis at that time as well, and then we did an inventory of how much buildable land you have available inside the urban growth boundary today, and did an initial urban growth boundary sufficiency analysis, we called it. We did some housing work as a follow-up to the comprehensive plan update. It was kind of implementing some of the policies that came out of that, the Sisters Housing Plan and the land use efficiency measures in 2022. Efficiency measures is kind of a term of art for how can urban areas use land more efficiently inside an urban growth boundary rather than sprawling out or making kind of inefficient use of land. The pace of development was pretty hot and heavy over the last couple of years, and so we did an update to the land sufficiency analysis in 2023, and that led to findings that, yes, there does seem to be a need for a UGB amendment process, and that's where we find ourselves today, going through this process to figure out how much land is needed, where might it make sense to amend the UGB, and how to go about doing that. So we had our project kickoff in late March for this project, kind of internal to the consultant team and staff. And the next phases are shown on the screen here. So right now we're finalizing the land need. So we're putting together a report that talks about how much land is available currently in the UGB and how much land do we think that the city needs based on the rules that apply in the state of Oregon. So we anticipate having that report ready in June. Next, we will be preparing a report that creates a study area. So there's a list of rules in state statute and administrative rules that talk about how you establish a study area, what needs to be in it, how big it needs to be. So we'll put that together between June and about August. And then we'll be creating and evaluating alternatives for the urban growth boundary. And there are, of course, rules for how that's done as well. And that'll take place kind of in the fall through January 2025. Through that evaluation process and a bunch of public engagement, we're going to arrive at a preferred alternative in early next year. And that alternative, with probably some tweaks, will make its way through the adoption of an amended UGB sometime in the middle of 2025. As an additional task, kind of depending on the amount of time and budgets left, we are anticipating doing some additional area planning tasks for areas that are going to be added to the urban growth boundaries. So what might these places look like? Going a level deeper than just what is the comprehensive plan designation? Maybe what are the transportation needs? Maybe what are the infrastructure needs for some of these areas? So that's a kind of TBD task as we get towards it next year. So I'm going to walk through what these steps kind of look like, give you just a brief introduction to what they entail. So the first step is identifying the land need, and this chart shows the anticipated growth of the City of Sisters all the way out to 2072, which is available in the latest Portland State University population forecast for Deschutes County. And so you can see in terms of percentage, the City of Sisters is the fastest growing and kind of greatest proportionally growing community in Deschutes County. You can see the county as a whole in orange there, Bend in green, Redmond in purple, Lapine in blue, and Sisters kind of on the top there. So we do this in about a 20-year planning horizon. So based on this report, there's about a 95% increase in population projected by the year 2043. So not insubstantial growth that we are identifying land need for. The next step is to identify the study area, and this is material that was in the UGB sufficiency report from last year. So this is kind of just a refresher, but we need to look at land within half a mile of the existing urban growth boundary. And then for areas that are called exception areas, so that's land that is already in a non-farm or forest use generally, we need to look out 1 mile from the urban growth boundary. And then there are rules about excluding land from the study area that is impracticable to serve with utilities, or it contains natural hazard areas, or contains natural resources. So we'll go through a bit of a refining process to whittle this study area down and that'll be the land that we're looking at to evaluate whether it can meet some of that land need for the city. There are rules about the priority of land that we include in the urban growth boundary. So urban reserves are something that you need to include first. The City of Sisters doesn't have any urban reserves, so that doesn't apply here. Exception areas, so like I said, rural residential and rural commercial areas are the second priority, and other non-resource land. So we have to look at those first and evaluate whether they will meet the need of the city for growth. The third priority is forest land or farmland that's not high value, and there are definitions for what high value means in this context. And then the last priority is farmland that is high value. As far as the size of the expansion area, so we did an initial look at basically lot size outside the existing urban growth boundary last year, and parcelization is something that you can look at. You know, there isn't a lot of further infill capacity in lands that are already very parcelized. So this is an example of one of the things that we'll be looking at and will affect the ultimate size of the expansion area that we're looking at. If you bring in land that is already, you know, partially urbanized, we count only part of that land as available to meet future needs. And then when we put together our alternatives, this will be next year, there are what are called statewide planning goal 14 factors that we need to evaluate, or that the city needs to evaluate to make a decision on which lands to include in the urban growth boundary. And those factors are efficient accommodation of identified land needs. So there has to be a match between what you say that you need and the land that's available. And you have to be able to accommodate that need in an efficient way. Orderly and economic provision of public facilities and surfaces. So can you get water, sewer, roads to these properties? There's a comparative environmental, energy, economic, and social consequences, sometimes called an EC or ESEE analysis, which is where you kind of weigh and balance those characteristics of an expansion area at that location, and then the compatibility of urban uses with nearby agricultural and forest activities occurring on farm and forest land. So if there is active farming, for example, adjacent to the proposed expansion area, that's something that you can use to make a decision one way or the other. So that's a bit of a preview for what we'll be up to over the next year and a half or so. And I'll pass it over to Matt to talk about public engagement, which is a big part of the process that we'll have here.
All right, thanks, Andrew. So I'll just talk about some of our goals in terms of public engagement, and Andrew will talk about some of the tools or strategies that, you know, we, and when I say we, really city staff with our help and guidance and support will be kind of undertaking to hear what people think about this, to give people opportunities to weigh in on what we're doing. You know, I will note that a lot of what we do is pretty prescriptive and prescribed by state rules. But there are these different factors we need to look at and weigh. We definitely want to hear what people have to say about the UGB amendment process. And I think the other thing I would say is that that kind of last step in the process, where we're looking at how to plan for future expansion areas, I would expect we'll hear a lot from people that'll be really important in informing that process. So I think there's sort of a couple types of, you know, guidance and information and comments we'll get from folks. One is just how do they feel about this UGB expansion and some of these alternative areas, and then the other is, you know, how to plan and make sure that the areas that come into the UGB, you know, remain kind of in keeping with what Sisters' goals and desires and quality of life are moving forward. So I'll note that. In terms of some of the goals, really want to hear from as many people as possible. And so we've identified a pretty wide variety of different ways to engage people and hear from people. We want to hear from folks who maybe aren't normally or always kind of at the table, a little harder to reach. So you see some language there about just making sure people who have a harder time engaging are also at the table. And, we kind of talk to city staff about who are some of the folks who maybe the city doesn't hear from as often in planning processes like this. And one of the things we heard is younger households and families, because they've got, frankly, a lot on their plates and not as much time to engage in these types of processes. So we need to think about ways to hear from them, as well as Hispanic or Latino residents. So I think, we're going to put some emphasis on hearing from folks who maybe we don't hear from as often. I think there's definitely kind of going to be some important work here to just kind of help inform people about the process and help them understand sort of what those statewide rule sideboards are and just how we're going through the process and why and how we're making the recommendations we're making. So that's pretty important. And also just, how people can continue to learn about the process and just be transparent about, when people are giving us information or providing comments, like how are we using those? How are those going to be reflected in what comes out of the process? So that's pretty important to us in terms of transparency, in terms of engagement generally. So I'll take a little break and Andrew will talk about this. And then I think and then, see what kind of questions and comments you have for all this. This will be our kind of last presentation slide.
Yeah, all right. Thanks, Matt. The draft engagement plan has a lot more detail about these tools, but I'll just touch on them real briefly. These are the things that we've identified that we're going to be using to get the word out and get input from folks, and we're open to ideas for other items or other events as well. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. So we do have a project website up on the city's website currently, as Scott mentioned. There's a story map, which is basically an interactive slideshow online, but it has mapping components that we will be adding to as we go through the process. So right now we have just a little bit about kind of the introductory materials, but as we prepare our reports, that'll get updated with sort of a layperson friendly version of the bottom line of the materials as we put them together. We're going to establish a steering committee, and we'll have steering committee meetings. That will be the main place where kind of draft products are brought and decisions get made about the direction of the process. We're going to have a number of one-on-one meetings and stakeholder interviews with property owners, interest groups, folks involved with local schools, parks, public facilities, et cetera. We've got, we can put together materials for small group meetings. We call them kind of meeting in a box materials. So you can have staff go to local clubs or stay at the coffee shop and advertise that and collect information and collect input from folks in a standardized way so that we can get all the forms together and see what people across all these meetings have said about our draft alternatives, for example. We're going to have at least one large community open house, and that's going to have a big online component as well. So I think that happens once we have some alternatives that we can really talk to folks about. We're going to have meetings with you all and with the city council throughout the process, including adoption hearings at the end of the process, and Deschutes County needs to have a set of hearings as well. We've been in discussions with them about whether it makes sense to do joint meetings or what that process is going to look like. So we'll be in coordination with them. And we're looking for other creative ways to reach people, either pop-up shops in town, or tabling events, or mailers, posters in windows, whatever we can to kind of get the word out once we have kind of enough material under our belt that we feel like we really can engage folks in a meaningful way. So that concludes our presentation here. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen and we can talk a little further. How do I stop sharing? There we go.
Is this the point, Andrew, Matt, that you want to entertain some questions or comments on what you've?
Yes. Yeah.
Ask away, guys.
I have a question, a couple.
Tom, can you get your microphone a little
Can't
closer?
figure this. Tom Reese. Why is it that we include exclusive farmland and national forest land in the bubble that we're looking at if that's probably a chance that it will not get sucked into the urban growth boundary? Why aren't those excluded, I guess is my question.
So I'll kind of take a shot at that. I will say that national forest land could potentially be excluded because it's managed by the federal government. But the UGB kind of study rules indicate that at least we start out with this kind of half-mile buffer around the city for this, quote unquote study area. But once we start identifying alternatives, we do need to go through that priority list that Andrew identified. And we the process is to first look at, in this case, exception areas. And if there's enough land in the exception areas out there and enough capacity to meet the needs we've identified, then we stop there. But if there's not enough, then we start to look at EFU lands first, non-high value EFU lands, and then second high value. So it's just to establish kind of the boundary of the potential study area, because we don't know without doing the analysis whether or not those higher priority areas are going to be adequate to meet the identified need. So hopefully that makes sense. It's really just kind of setting the larger, let's call it, universe of potential areas that may be included in the alternative expansion areas that we evaluate.
Thank you.
If
Yep.
if you look at the map and there's a big blob of the RR10 in yellow up in the corner, do you think that would be enough land, best guess, for the urban growth expansion? And also, what percentage do you figure of RR10, for example, that people already own large tracts would want to come in and support development?
So that's a great question. I mean, that is the kind of question we'll be answering as we go through this process. I would hesitate to make any kind of like prediction about that right now, because it depends. As Andrew said, it is more challenging to develop land that's been parcelized to a certain degree. If those are all 10-acre sites, then that's easier than areas that have been parcelized down to or chopped up down to like half-acre to 1-acre sites. So, and until we start doing the analysis and hearing from people with those specific properties, pretty tough for us to say. I mean, we know about how much we've done. We've estimated about how much land we think you're going to need. But without we haven't looked closely at those areas yet in terms of how much housing and commercial areas and other uses could be accommodated there. So, I mean, it's a great question, and we will know before too long. But
I was just wondering if there was a ballpark historical average that you guys, since you're in the business of doing this stuff, you use, or.
I mean, it really varies, and again, there's not a ballpark. Well, again, we know approximately how many acres you're going to need because we've done those calculations of estimated land need. But there's not necessarily a ballpark. Oh, well, parcels 10 acres in size on average are going to get you this much. That is going to be different in every place. Also because constraints on those parcels might vary as well. So, I mean, it's again, really good question, but I'm not going to tonight give you a ballpark. Yeah, sorry about that.
So can we jump forward on some of at this list right here, I see, it seems to me like we need to jump forward on this pretty quick and get like some of the stakeholders involved and see if we can solve some of our problems pretty quickly, and then move on to the more difficult, trying to grab the last little bits of acreage. And that makes sense. We're not going to follow this list like one at a time.
Which list are you referring to?
Well, the public engagement tools, basically, because it says you guys are talking about the stakeholders interviews. I think we should bring the people in sooner that we know that might be willing to play. And get the low hanging fruit, if you will, out of the way.
Yeah, so I'll again initially respond and see what Scott and Andrew have to add. So one of our first steps is to establish a steering committee and be meeting with them fairly soon. I would say some of those initial stakeholder interviews will also happen fairly early in the process. We still do have to kind of step through this fairly methodical process in terms of the phases of the process that Andrew outlined a little while ago. But I think to your point, yeah, there's some of those outreach activities that can occur earlier in the process and some that are going to occur likely a little bit later. In terms of just giving community members information about the process, we have already started to do that in terms of the project website and the story map. And we have, I think it was in your packet, this draft community engagement plan, and it kind of lays out like when different types of engagement activities are intended to occur. But yes, I think, getting a steering committee on board and starting to talk to some key stakeholders are really good early steps in terms of engagement. So, but we'll still have to go through that process that we outlined. And there's going to be different points where we do different things to talk to people and hear from people.
I've got a few questions. Okay, first is want to clarify. So at this stage in all of the projects, are we, I guess as a city now compelled to expand the urban growth boundary? Like, are we at that stage where like the answer is, and this is as much for when people ask me questions as it is for myself, but as this process moves forward, it's more like when and which land, not if.
That is pretty much where you all are at this point. We'll see if Scott wants to correct me or add anything, but you as a city have made a choice to pursue this process, and you are generally compelled by state law. Every city in Oregon is required to plan for 20 years of growth. You're required to use a certain set of population projections. And not only that, I mean, there's sort of the being compelled by the state, but there's also thinking about, if you don't do this, what are the impacts on your city, on your community, on housing prices and housing availability and things like that. So I think the short answer is yes, you're at the point of where, how much and where and how.
And I'll just add
whether or not to do it.
Yeah, I'll just add that the other sort of part of the equation is, can you use land inside the urban growth boundary that you have already more efficiently? And the city went through a process of looking at the development code, looking at where land is available, and actually adopting some development code measures to try to make better use of the downtown zones, the multifamily zones. So it's often talked about as, do you grow out or do you grow up? And the city has been having this conversation and has taken direct steps to help kind of densify and more efficiently use parts of its downtown as well. So now it's the other part of the need that remains after that has already taken place.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I had the clear answer to that question. Thank you.
Yep.
So as far as community engagement and education, I mean, I'm 100% behind that, but I'm curious how much room is there for like community members to actually influence the outcome, or do you think it's more about education? Because I assume the process is going to kind of unfold a reality, and then we're going to have to make decisions based on the reality that it unfolds in front of us, like who wants to play, that kind of thing. How much land is contiguous and can we bring in certain places? So I'm just curious how much influence people will have coming to these meetings, or should it be more educationally discussed?
I'll take a first shot again, and Scott or Andrew, always feel free to jump in ahead of me. But what I'll say is, I think You're right. Like this, and I said this earlier, there are some fairly prescriptive requirements around how these processes are undertaken. A lot of it is fairly technical in terms of how we evaluate different potential expansion areas, but it's not completely, 100% prescribed. So when we start thinking about those different criteria that Andrew mentioned earlier in terms of how we evaluate different potential expansion areas, we definitely want to hear from people about how they think about those criteria. What kind of information might they have to bring to the table to help us with that? I think definitely there is a strong, for lack of a better word, education or information component of this. And I do think that's pretty important. I don't know where I put the balance 60-40 or 55-45 or where, but I do think that's a pretty important component. And I also think that people will definitely be able to influence the recommendations around once we've identified potential expansion areas or a preferred area, what are some of the really important principles around how future development is planned in those areas. And so I think this process is an opportunity to hear from people about that. I mean, you've got a set of comprehensive plan policies, you've got other plans that sort of talk about that, but this is another, I think, good opportunity for people to weigh in on that. So that might be again, an element of the process where people have a little more, there's a little more creativity or flexibility involved, I guess. I don't know, but Andrew or Scott, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just add that when I was talking about the goal 14 factors that the city needs to use and make findings for to bring land in and to evaluate the choices. Some of those are fairly straightforward, like can it be served with infrastructure, but some are a little more qualitative that folks can weigh in on. Is the what are the social impacts of expanding here in this way, with this type of comprehensive plan designation. So there are, when we get to the point of kind of weighing and balancing some of the options that we put together in the alternatives, I think there is real meaningful opportunity for input. But you're right. We don't want to give the impression that it's a wide open playing field and people can kind of choose their own adventure here.
When it comes to public outreach and like specifically communicating with people who may or may not be impacted, do you just nuts and bolts? How do you reach people? Do you direct mail? Do we just public notices? What are some examples of, like, for example, how you might reach people in the tollgate neighborhood or these people who may be, subject to being pulled into the city?
I mean, I would say it's sort of to some degree all of the above, right? I mean, we definitely want to use the city's digital or electronic resources, the website, the story map we're putting together, the city's email list. The city does have an email list for folks. Just paper flyers or materials at City Hall, in businesses, just to direct people towards that information. City staff's already been working with the Nugget to get an article about this process published. I think hopefully there's opportunities to continue to do that. We will be talking to you all again in the council about this. So there's some opportunities there. I think getting the folks who are on our steering committee to kind of, to the extent they have constituent groups or folks that they communicate with, doing that. So I think it's sort of, in terms of particularly giving people information about the process, it's any of those things we can do, any and all.
I think in
Does
addition,
that help?
just thinking about, how we, we're so focused on contacting our city residents, but this involves more than just city residents. So, they're plugged in different ways, but yeah, that's one thing I've been starting to think about is how do we get out there and contact the folks that could potentially be, that are in this study area, that they may not know they're in the study area, and what is the implication of that. And I think, like Matt said, it's a all hands on deck kind of way to get people informed, because people get their information in so many different ways. But I'm thinking, like, probably you know, especially if there's like organized HOAs out there, that would probably be a primary way of like, we'll schedule, get on their meeting and we'll come make a presentation there and kind of inform them of what's going on and direct them to the information that we have available. If you have any good ideas about that we're not thinking of about how to get in front of those folks, let us know.
I think based on age groups, you know, you're gonna have to do a variety of things. Like, there's a lot of older people in our area, male, you know, simple.
Yeah.
For them, other people, you know, your public meetings, you know, emails, different ways.
No,
Right.
I'll toss out one other
There's a
thought.
variety of different methods so that we're going to hit folks who get their information in different ways. So we can't rely on just one factor. And so, Andrew, I think I interrupted you. Did you have something else?
It was me, but just one other quick thought, and I don't want to obligate them to doing something specific, but working with the school district, because, you know, you think about kind of the reach of the school district in terms of where people live. The school district's a much larger boundary than the city limits. So to the extent we can work with them, partner with them to, again, you know, provide ways for people to learn about the process. And then, as Scott said, you know, I think staff's like happy to go out and talk to folks, talk to specific groups. So letting people know what those opportunities are. And I think school districts tend to be good potential partners. And I will say they're often better partners in smaller communities, because in like large cities, they got so many things going on. But in a community the size of Sisters, I think they might be a good partner to just, again, help get the word out about things and hit some of those kind of populations that we talked about that may not otherwise spend time kind of at meetings or learning about this. So that's just one other thought.
So, I'm always, I'm a little bit of a curious person. So we're going to get through all the way through this process and we will have 0 new land in the city. I mean, just at the end of this process. Is that correct? I mean, at the end of the UGB amendment process.
Technically, that's correct. Yeah, and if I understand your question correctly, this process is not going to automatically result in land in the city on that day.
Yeah.
It still remains in the county until such time the property owner proposes annexation into the city.
Yeah.
So some of this land could remain in the county for a long period of time or forever.
Yeah. And I have to ask my questions slowly to make sure that each one maybe builds on the next. So I would imagine if other people are like me, there'll be some curiosity about, okay, then what? And it may be helpful in the education process to have like the very simple version of that. Because if I weren't involved in all this, I would have no idea of what the difference was. I mean, I'm you know, learning as I go here, and I'm happy with that. But and I'd asked a question in a meeting a few months ago, and my understanding is, as I'm just going to pretend someone has a 10-acre parcel, and that's going to be what's the word, brought into the city?
Annexed.
Annexed. Thank you. So it's going to be annexed into the city, but at the same time, there's probably going to be development plans for that land to come into the city. And I think it would just be helpful to have that process laid out a little bit so that someone could envision what that looks like. So
Yeah.
that's just a comment.
That's a good comment.
Absolutely.
Some criteria of like how the process goes, and even like my question would be the criteria of like, how do we start establishing these properties, and like, and what is the criteria of this one's a yes and that one's a no? And I realize that they change a lot throughout the different uses, you know, like we spoke about the farming and the forest properties, and you know, a lot of that is federal government property, and it's probably off the table. I think it's safe to say most of it is. But some of the other properties, how do we really establish a criteria where this is in and that's out? Is there strict rules that we have to follow for that, or at some point can we be, you know, make our own choices?
Well, again, there are strict rules, and it kind of gets back to some of the stuff that Andrew described earlier. There's some strict rules in terms of where you start looking and how closely you have to look at that until you either do or don't have enough acreage in that category. And then there's some strict rules on those different criteria you weigh or evaluate to compare different areas or properties for inclusion. And so they're kind of those things we talked about earlier, like how efficiently are those areas going to develop, given the size of lots in those areas? Can you get water, sewer, roads out to those places in a cost-effective manner? Are there natural resource or hazard constraints that reduce the actual capacity for development? How are we comparing sort of the economic impact or the social impacts of one area to another? So it's unfortunately not like a super simple set of criteria, and we're looking at them at sort of the same time once we have a set of potential expansion areas. So I think, it's on us to try to do a good job of explaining that to people as we're going through the process, and before, we're doing our best to start to do that, but it's just going to be incumbent on us to do a good job of explaining that and then moving forward in that way, and talking to people about, what are the things they can kind of help us think about and weigh in on and provide guidance on. I hope that hopefully that helps answer the question. But
Does help a little bit. I mean, I once we get past all of those things that you said, and and it seems like that those things are, to me, they're fairly straightforward to me. That all the stuff that all the logistics of all of it. But then once we get past all that, how do we choose? Let's say there's two equal properties. I mean, we don't. And and it brings the next question that I have is the ballpark number of acres that we need of all general acres, and then we split that into different zoning. But did I miss that number?
What I asked earlier, but
But what is that number? Do we have a ballpark number that we're looking for?
So that's going to be identified in the land needs report.
Okay.
That we're gonna, when I think towards the end of the month, when we had the steering committee meeting, I think is the first step. Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt and Andrew, where we would present that report that
Okay.
kind of firms up all the studies they showed all the studies we've done in the past. It kind of firms up those studies.
Okay.
And
correct. And we're quite close to having that
Okay.
number. We had a number
Uh-huh.
because we kind of did this update of Andrew called the UGB sufficiency analysis. And so we had a pretty good number about, I'm gonna say 9 months ago. But because you've had more development occur within the city since then, it's reduced the existing supply. And because you've got some more properties where they haven't been developed, but there's been planning for development, it's changed, the number of homes we could expect, in those specific areas. So we still need to finish updating that, and we're really close. And like Scott said, within the next couple of weeks, we'll have something available. So you'll know what that estimate is in terms of the need. And again, as Andrew said, we already went through that initial process too of looking at, what can the city do to use land within the existing boundary more efficiently? That's a part of any UGB study, and that was done as part of a previous recent study. So we've kind of already tackled that piece, but we still need to update those numbers around land needs, and then that's going to drive the size of the expansion areas we're looking at.
To your point, you may well be in a situation where there are two properties that seem like they're equally suitable. And when we get to that point, I think it will behoove the city to try to, base the decision on kind of things you can write findings of fact about, and try to tie them to the criteria that are allowed by the state to make those decisions about. And we'll be sort of in conversation with the city and other stakeholders at that point. But that might be a place that we find ourselves in, and hopefully we can find a clear answer that doesn't put the city in a situation where they're having to maybe I'll just stop talking. Try to hopefully we can use a factual base to make that kind of decision. I'll just say that.
You don't want to be
we certainly want to avoid bringing a bunch of land in that know that the owners don't have any interest in developing, and this is going to sit there for years and years and years. I mean, it's going to sit there for some period of time while they go through the process of applying for annexation and going through development planning processes and things like that. But I think we would hope to avoid a situation where it's just kind of brought into the UGB, but doesn't ultimately meet your needs for new growth. I mean, that's not would not be a very satisfactory decision, I would say. So, but
one more
in
question
terms-
on that number, on the amount of property that we need. Just are we like? I mean, you guys obviously have some idea, but are we out of the ballpark? I mean, we need everything we can get. Are we in trouble? I guess.
Okay, so I'm going to throw out the last set of numbers we had. So this is not the number you're going to see in a couple of weeks.
Sure.
But where we were as of the sort of earlier analysis, we were between about 200 and 250 acre deficit. That was the need to bring, and that was based on, and it's 200 to 250 acres at a certain capacity. So it can be, you can end up needing to bring more than that in depending on the relative capacity and the types of uses we're talking about. And that's why we're really hesitant to say, oh, it's exactly this much, because we don't know yet. But if you want to think about a ballpark, that's around where we were when we last ran those numbers.
Would it be the preference to do it in one specific area rather than doing some over here, some in the east and some in the west? I would imagine from Public Works viewpoint, they'd want to try and get it concentrated.
I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing we'll evaluate, as we go through the process that Andrew talked about. And we may find that that's what makes the most sense, but we may not. And so again, it's hard for me to say for sure, but possibly.
When the city of Bend did a similar process a number of years ago, there was kind of a criteria of sort of property owner equity. So some big properties, some small properties, some in different locations around the city. So that is something that if the city chooses to value it, you can use as a criteria. And I saw that Rick set his hand up for a little while. Why don't you jump in?
Yes, I had a question about your ballpark. I know it's way ballpark of the 250 acres, but what does the city currently have for acreage? I'm trying to visualize what 250 acres looks like compared to our footprint currently.
I'll take a crack at that. I think we've always talked about us being approximately 2 square miles. I think it's 1.8 maybe, but running off to 2. I think equates to, if you do your little calculator on the computer, square miles to acreage,
1,280.
comes out to be around 1,250 acres.
Yeah.
So, you're talking 15 to 20% of expansion of relative to the existing land area.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that's something as we kind of move forward and have a better sense of the number, that would be a really good graphic to show people, just like, what are we talking about here in terms of the relative size of the expansion? Because we're not talking about doubling, the size of the city, but it's not an insignificant size or percentage. So yeah,
Right.
Really.
Having
I
a
appreciate
graphic
you doing the math.
that would really be helpful. So
Yes.
we're talking currently Sisters is about 2 sections, mile by mile, so 2 sections. Yeah. Thank you.
So any land that's included in the UGB expansion has to be contiguous with the city now, is that correct? So like we can't just.
Ultimately, yes, you can't just like go out and do sort of a cherry stem expansion.
And are we, I know it's not ideal, but are we allowed to have islands of people who do not want to be included in that, or does that question make sense?
You generally want, I am not sure what the state law says about an island, but you generally, I think the areas need to essentially be contiguous. Now, what will happen often in cities is as annexation occurs, islands get created, and you just see that all over the state where that has happened. I think you generally want to avoid that as well, kind of as you're moving forward with any kind of annexation process. But I don't know that the state law says, oh, that cannot occur. I do think in terms of the expansion of the UGB, I think the expansion area needs to be a contiguous set of properties. And it's not, you can't have a bunch of islands inside of there. Yeah, but I mean, and Scott said this earlier, but, and I think we have too, but expanding the UGB doesn't mean you're forcing someone to develop their land. You know, they still, annexation is a voluntary process. It's property owner initiated. And so, you know, you're not forcing somebody to do something, but you are putting them within that set of properties within the urban growth boundary area. And it is assumed that those areas are going to become urban over time. I mean, that is the assumption. That's the whole sort of point behind it. So I don't know if that helps. And we can, some of these questions where, you know, I said, I think, or we're pretty sure, we'll clarify those things and let you know as a follow-up.
Yeah, no, that's great. My mind just kind of goes all over there. Yeah.
It's a great question. Yeah.
One quick question. Sarah pretty much covered what I wanted to ask. But with respect to parcels that are determined to be feasible, do the property owners, and I realize that just because you get brought into the UGB, that doesn't necessarily change your status, whether you're in the city or the county. That's a whole nother process, or whether you want to develop or not develop. But do landowners have a choice when it comes to state law to not, do they have any sort of recourse with respect to not letting their property go into the UGB, or is that a forced decision?
I mean, they can certainly comment throughout the process, and, you know, so you can base your decisions to some degree on that, and we can tweak the boundary to some degree on that. But again, we're not going to want to end up with these kind of islands within an expansion area. So I'm going to say we'll get back to you with a more definitive answer on that one. But I think that it's not a simply you can opt out because you know you don't.
No, I figured it was not so much an opportunity to opt out at all. I think if you own a property that is deemed to be ideal, that's contiguous to the current UGB, but as a property owner, and I'm just curious more than anything, you say, I don't want to join the UGB. I don't want my property to be in the UGB. I'm assuming that state law says you don't have a choice in that.
But if the UGB is, if that boundary is adopted and you're in there, then yes, that is true. And so again, we're gonna get back to you just to make sure that I don't misspeak.
I think that would be a good education piece, just because most folks here in Sisters have no idea how this process works.
Yeah,
And
for sure. Yeah.
There's also an independent spirit here in Sisters that doesn't so much care for government to come in and tell them what to do.
Yeah. Yep. Point totally well taken.
Typically, it's a pretty big economic advantage to be in the UGB. If you have one dwelling on 10 acres and all of a sudden you're in the UGB and you can, you know, make enough money to retire, essentially. That's what I've seen in Portland in the past. You know, we moved here 2015, but before that I saw.
Totally. I mean, it's well known that can potentially be a boon to your property value, but not everybody's motivated by money.
No, some people don't.
Yep.
Scott, I have maybe this is a question for you. In the maps, Indian Ford Creek is not included in that. And is that, it looks to me sometimes during the year, it's a floodplain. So is that not considered a viable deterrent for building?
So areas that are in a floodplain constraint.
Well, but it's not, I mean, Indian Ford Creek is not on the map. And so I'm just curious if that was missed, or it doesn't meet the criteria for potential floodplain.
That's a good question. I don't know what, I think the map is just kind of real conceptual at this point, and we haven't done that kind of level of analysis of the suitability, and that will be a factor that we would consider when we do that exercise. Certainly identify constraint areas that you can't develop, that we want to develop in, that we want to stay away from. So question to you guys, Matt and Andrea, that the study area is pretty conceptual right now. We may not have picked up on all the constraints yet, because that's the point of the exercise that we're about ready to, that we'll be embarking upon here soon, right?
Yeah, that's right. We may have not got the full set of data for the study area yet. We're going to do a full buildable lands inventory for the study area, which means looking at which parcels are developed and where the houses are and where natural features are and steep slopes. So that's a step that's going to come up here.
Yeah, and some of these maps were kind of initial maps we prepared a while back, and we were primarily using kind of a mix of, for sure for the constraints stuff, we were using in part either city GIS data or county zoning data. And so yes, there's probably some stuff that is in these areas that are in the potential study area where we haven't captured all that stuff. So, but like Andrew said, that'll be one of the next things we're doing.
Tom, you're spot on. That area along Indian Ford is not buildable.
Right.
It's not developable. It's
Yeah, it's all in the floodplain.
it's all wetlands.
Yeah.
And there's a large swath along there. It's pretty significant. And then also McKinney Butte would be probably deemed to be unacceptable as well, just because of the topography.
And there's sort of a couple of different ways we would look at that. One would be to, exclude them from the study area, and the other would be if there's contiguous parcels on either side or in some of those priority areas that make sense to look at. And I'm not saying there are in that case, but just in general, then some of those areas might be still included in the study area or in an alternative area, but they would show up with almost no capacity for future development. And so they kind of wouldn't count towards the capacity that we need. So those are a couple of different ways to think about that, I guess.
Any other questions?
So if there's nothing else on that, I think we were just going to cover briefly the steering committee update and try to identify some planning commissioners who would like to be on that committee. So just a quick update on that. Well, background, you guys have heard plenty of, probably enough about this to know what the purpose of it is, but to help advise the city, the planning commission, the council on a process, and bring citizens, landowners, people in the city, people outside of the city into a committee, along with a couple council members, a couple planning commissioners, and then staff would, and the consultant will help support this committee. And they just provide recommendations, and it's another filter of the information that goes to planning commission and council. And we just got done today with interviews for folks who wanted to be on that committee. We had 24 applications. So we got great response. Then we interviewed 13 of them, and we finished the interviews, got great. I mean, we couldn't have asked for a better group of people, and it was a tough decision to whittle them down. But our goal was to kind of make sure that as many voices as possible will be on that committee. Longtime folks, people who've been here for a long time, people who own property out in the study area, some newcomers. We've got some, we always complain that we don't get enough youth involvement. So we had some great young candidates that represent the folks that would like to put stakes down here, but can't afford to. And so it's great to hear those voices, some folks that have families. So we feel like we've struck a good balance, and those appointments will be made at the council meeting next week. And the first steering committee meeting will be at the end of June. But we would like to, at this meeting, hopefully come up with some planning commissioners two planning commissioners that would like to be on it. Just factors to consider is if you don't feel this process is going to take 12 more months or 15 more months, maybe more. If your term is gonna kind of come to an end, you don't think you're gonna reapply or whatever, you may want to factor that into considering whether you want to be on this committee so that there's continuity throughout the process. But yeah, I don't know if we need to add anything else to the discussion in terms of what the steering committee's, the purpose of it is. Maybe I should mention the commitment. 4 meetings over the course of the process, and we'll have you have this group weigh in on the land needs report. We'll have it weigh in on the once we've established the study area and kind of provide an analysis. We'll run it by the steering committee, and then once we create several alternatives, you know, different scenarios of where the UGB could expand. We'll bring that forward to the steering committee, and then once we've identified a preferred alternative based on all the feedback we've received, that will go through the steering committee as well. And that would conclude the participation of the steering committee at that point. But so are there any questions on kind of what the committee involvement is or what we're looking for?
I think I got it.
Anybody, I think we've heard from a few that there's some potential interest there. So if there's more than 2, you know, we might have to figure out to do a vote. I don't know how we would resolve that, but are there folks that are interested in being on that committee?
I'd be willing.
You'd be interested? All right, Rick, I think you had mentioned in the past that you were interested.
Yes,
Anybody
sir.
else? Well, you might make it easy on us here. If those are the only 2. Anybody second thoughts?
I talked to you about it, but I've made another decision that influences my ability to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know. Going once, going twice.
Sold.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Art and Rick. Appreciate you guys. Appreciate you guys stepping up for that. Obviously, you guys in your planning commission role will have plenty of involvement with this, and
So you find a way to involve those other 11 people that came to apply? If they're that active, it seems like we should try to
well,
find a
yeah.
place. I mean, if they're willing to come and apply, I mean, that's
You
kind
know,
of hard to.
it's kind of a balance between you know, having the right size of committee to get things done and
Yeah.
having
Oh, yeah.
too many voices.
Yeah.
But we've told folks that if they don't get on the committee, that they can stay involved in a lot of different ways. They can come attend the steering committee meetings, they're public meetings, and just be a participating citizen in general. There's plenty of ways.
To help spread the word.
And
Mention that they can apply to be on the planning commission at the end of the year.
we did. Yes. Yeah, exactly. There are other opportunities and ways to participate. So thank you. Did I miss anything, Matt, Andrew, on steering committee stuff?
I don't think so. Yeah, I think we're good. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Anything else that you guys want to add to the mix here?
I'd say just thanks for all the excellent questions and thoughts and comments. And yeah, we'll be back in touch, but really good discussion from my perspective. So thank you.
So the next time we would have a planning commission meeting probably or on this subject would maybe be in July or August. Is that, Andrew, is that kind of on the schedule? Somewhere around that time frame where we would present the land needs report to them?
I should have that on the top of my head, but that sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no meeting. We only have 1 meeting in July, and I think we've got it already taken with, we've got other agenda items. So we're gonna have to balance all this, but sometime in the late July, early August timeframe.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me, but we'll circle back and confirm.
Yeah. All right,
Okay.
that's all we got, I think.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Any other staff or commissioner comments?
Guys have anything out there?
Do you think we could go through the calendar very quickly to just make sure we've got everything?
Not exactly like I'm going on summer vacation or something.
So Next meeting after this is June 20th, the public hearing for the short-term rentals.
Yeah, I heard.
Um,
4th, we're out.
4th is canceled, yeah. July 18th, we have tentatively scheduled, Sunset Meadows has proposed a modification. They've submitted an application that would,
Can you speak up a little bit, please?
oh, sorry, Rick. Yeah, Sunset Meadows has submitted a modification to alter some of the specifics of the phasing requirement that, require that they have a certificate of occupancies for the multifamily before they can start on their 3rd and 4th phase. Is that correct, Matt? Yeah. So that's something we need to fit in at some point. And then we had tentatively scheduled to start talking about the building hardening development code amendments that night as well. We have to talk to you, Jeff, about whether we're adding too much to the mix here. But and then Emmy and I are mostly Emmy is working on a downtown building hardening report that kind of is a part of an historic preservation grant that we got that seeks to provide some guidelines, recommendations for building materials that are fire resistant that also help preserve the historic integrity of some of the buildings downtown. It's kind of a interesting project that's going on. So we wanted to give you an update of that on that meeting. And then August, what would be the first meeting in August here? August 1st is the first Thursday, and August 15th would be the 3rd Thursday. We don't have anything specifically targeted for those agendas, but we do have some development projects that are coming through that might start hitting some of these agendas at the same time. We're trying to do urban growth boundary stuff, so it's gonna get interesting here. So August 1st and the 15th, we have targeted.
July 18th, was that one?
July 18th, yes, we do have a meeting that night for potentially a public hearing on Sunset Meadows modification. And then a work session on building hardening. We think, well, I shouldn't say anything about what I think in terms of how long that might take, so I don't want to jinx it.
15th for me, I'm just so you know, I'm taking a kid to college that week.
The 15th of August.
So I will not be here, but I will be available the 1st. So if you, as you guys are putting the agendas together.
Okay.
The 1st of August? I was,
Yeah.
If you're making notes, I won't be here on the 18th of July.
Okay. That's good to know. Anybody else know that they're going to be gone of any of those meetings yet? You can let us know later if you need to.
I don't know if the week of August 5th happens to be a meeting week, but I'll be out that week.
August 1st would be a potential meeting date.
Good there.
Okay.
August 1st and then August 15th.
Yeah, usually the 1st and 3rd Thursdays,
That's what I was
we try to do a work session on the first one. So it's usually just a 4 to 5 or so. And then public hearings we try to do on the 3rd Thursdays. Anything I'm missing, guys? As time goes on, we're going to bring back defensible space code amendment standards, or code amendments. So that'll be a discussion it'll follow after building hardening. Then occasionally we like to bring in housekeeping code amendments that we're keeping a running list on. Emmy usually is ready for phase 2 on the housekeeping amendments at some point. So does that help?
That's great. Thank you. I mean, I could do through the end of the year, but we're good. I'll let you know what I've got going on.
Yeah.
You're that far ahead, huh? That's pretty good.
I got stuff planned 2 years out.
That's good planning. Or bad planning. I don't
Not
know.
ideal.
That's-
Anybody else? Anything? Okay, thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We're adjourned.
Thank you.
How are you doing, Tom? You doing okay?